Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we paint a Halloween pumpkin. I start to paint the segments of the pumpkin with some deep yellow, and I mix the orange of a deep yellow and crimson red, or whatever deeper red is available. I make sure that I have a lot of paint so that I don't run out of it, because this paper needs to stay wet while applying different kind of colors on it. And this painting I use a little bit of a lower quality paper, so it contains only 20% of cotton, which is not the best, but I tried to make the best out of it. I continue with the second segment on the right side of the pumpkin, but I thought I add here a little bit of a turquoise blue, so it's kind of like at the shadowy side of the pumpkin. I add a little bit here and there turquoise blue, and it flows down and mixes well with the yellow. I also make sure that to take off the excess paints, although right now here I don't have that much. Then I continue with the middle of the pumpkin, mixing as well a lot of paint, so I don't run out in the middle. I add more and more orange when it comes towards the bottom half of the pumpkin. So basically it's like a little bit like light coming at the top, and at the bottom you have the darker colors. Here I have used a lot of paint, so I need to make sure that I take off the excess paint, especially around the teeth. You usually do that with a clean brush, and it needs to be done before the paper gets damp or before the paper dries out, because it's a little bit of a pain to take it out later. I add more and more deeper orange, especially around the nose. After all, it's supposed to be around pumpkin, so it already adds a little bit to the volume. You can see that the paper is still really wet, and this because I can avoid some of the blossoms or those bloomings appearing. As at the moment it's a little bit, now I don't really want them to have here. And then I continue with the side of the pumpkin. Here in Finland we don't actually really celebrate Halloween as much, although you can find many Halloween decorations around October or before Halloween, but it's mostly like for private parties, not as much that children go around and collect some sweets from the neighbors. It's not very common. At the back of the pumpkin I proceed as previously, so I add really like a lot of paint of yellow, and then adding here and there more of an orange. And then I have decided, okay, let's add some more deeper yellow as well into the eye, which means that later on I need to add darker layers of orange or red next to the eye, so it's kind of like popping out better. But I didn't really want to have like brown at the middle of the eye to be brown or some darker colors. Here I mixed as well more of a turquoise blue, and then on the left side I proceed basically the same, adding some more of the yellow, which is flowing down the painting, and some more orange colors. as well as a deeper red to pronounce the eye. Continue with the chin, which has also both colors. So basically on the left side you have a little bit of orange, and on the right side you have a little bit of turquoise blue. Adding here a little bit more there, here and there, some orange colors and some turquoise colors, and then continue with the ground. So the pumpkin is basically sitting on some leaves. I decided to mix some lemon yellow and then add some more dark colors of turquoise blue, which I spread like carefully underneath the pumpkin. And the turquoise blue gets more darker in pigment on the right side. In this case I also use a lot of paint of different colors, so it's like lemon yellow and then having more of turquoise blue, and really to make sure that it's all wet. I haven't actually wetted the paper beforehand, because I have noticed with this particular paper it gives a bad result. It dries out way too fast, so I apply the colors by having a lot of paint ready. Here and there I splash a little bit of orange. It doesn't matter if it comes a little bit on the pumpkin, because after all we get more layers on. Then I have decided to add some orange windows, so where there's some light coming from, and adding some masking fluids, because everything is going to be covered in a darker paint. So there's masking fluids in the windows and masking fluids underneath the leaves and a little bit around the pumpkin. Now I made a lot of paint of indigo blue and cover the sky with it. I make sure to work really fast before the paper gets just damp and dries out partly. On the right side I don't add as much paint, because it doesn't really matter at this point if it's like dried up there, because a tree is coming there, a bigger tree, so it covers it up anyway if you make any mistakes. But on the left side I need the scary house to be there. And here and there I add some clouds of purple, so mixing basically the indigo blue with some crimson red and spreading it at the sky while it's still wet, and then let the paints flow, so they're mixing really wet. But you have to make sure that the paper is really wet at this point, that you have loads of colors. Here I added a little bit of orange, but it didn't really work out as well. Now continue with the right side and adding the same paint mixture as before, and you can see that it's a little bit of blossoms happening there, and yeah, adding a little bit more of the purple there as well. But like I said, there's gonna be like a bigger tree, so it doesn't really matter if there's some few mistakes and the paint is dried out or something like this, that it doesn't really mix well or blend in really well. Now continue with the second layer on the pumpkin, and I used a light layer of orange and adding a little bit more of a deeper red. And here I have to really say that you need clean colors for this paint, otherwise it's not gonna work really nicely, because I use a lot of blues, so make sure that the water is clean and that the colors are mixed clean as well, so it doesn't give this muddy color. Adding a little bit more underneath the eyes, so they start to pop up a little bit, and next to the pumpkin's mouth, and then adding like more and more deeper color underneath. But I leave the top of the pumpkin like still yellow. Adding more of the orange color underneath the eyelids or around the eyelids to emphasize that there are some eyelids. And then carefully spreading the colors as well. It doesn't really matter if it's really such a dark color, because at the end you add more and more of different layers. Here I use the same, like really light color of orange or light layer, and then adding at the side of the segments more of a darker orange. Then I wanted to emphasize a little bit of the teeth. Now I have actually noticed here that I forgot to paint over the mouth, but I do it at a later stage when I put a different layer down again. I continue with the chin, so it's the same basically. It's like a dark orange, and then I continue with the turquoise blue and on the right side. But it starts to get a little bit more form here. And then again a little bit more orange above the eye of the pumpkin. I actually have been only to one Halloween party, and I was dressed as a bee. It was a surprise party. I was invited, so I didn't have much time to prepare, and that was the only costume that I had ready. Here I add more darker turquoise blue. It's the same, kind of like emphasizing the segments, so it's more on the sides of the pumpkin as well as the back. Some orange and some red, and then as well some turquoise blue. And then spreading the darkest areas around. That's here and there. And on the stem I add some self-mixed brown, basically of a burnt umber and some blue. I haven't recorded the initial face because it only recorded the back of my head, so I'd rather cut it out. But basically it's the first layer, it's just like light brown, and here add more bluish and darker colors. I continue with the scary house, which I draw again because the first layer kind of covered it. But yes, continue with the first layer for the house, and it's basically some Prussian blue and then turquoise blue on one side. And here I use as well a lot of paint. Yeah, I'm actually quite careful, but then I decided, okay, it doesn't really matter, because then you add more of the darker paints, gray and blue colors to emphasize the house. So this is just the first layer, and you don't need to be focused so much on the detail. It's just around the windows that you have there, and then some more windows on the side, and a second house. But you can see here as well that I have a lot of paint, so I just continue from up to down adding the paints. I don't get that much of those blossoms, because with this paper it's a little bit of a tricky idea. So here you can see already like the shape of the different of those two windows and the doors. Apparently we have very big windows and very small door, and I've decided a little bit of a fence here and having some gravestones around the area. The side, and then I add a little bit of a big bush or a big tree next to the pumpkin, so it's like emphasizing the color of the pumpkin, especially as it stays a little bit lighter the way through. Adding some window lists. Very, very simple drawing. Already focusing on the foreground of the painting. and kind of like creating a small path which is leading towards the pumpkin. Again, I have a lot of paint ready, and I paint around the gravestones because I thought, okay, I don't need really that much masking fluid to waste on it. And go deeper and around the leaves of the pumpkin, so they're more emphasized at the end of the painting. Adding here a little bit more darker colors. And more of the paint. Now I am on the left side and add some bushes there, and you can see already some small gravestones. I proceed basically the same way as I have done before on the right side of the painting, and just adding more colors and a little bit of structure here and there, and we have like a big path coming up already. I won't add much to the path anymore because I thought it's nice to have a little bit of darker here and then having some light areas there. I mixed a little bit more of the paint grain with the blue colors and adding it while the other paint is still wet. But it doesn't really have to, because after all the gravestones need to be like really popping out, so you can do it as well as in a later stage, so it doesn't really need to be mixed up that well. Now add also more of the darker colors on the tree, and I focused on the scary house because it looks actually really quite pale, but I don't cover it completely up with the paint, so it's just certain areas which are basically on the shadow side, and spreading it carefully. As well as the second house needs a little bit more of a paint over. Now I continue with the actual tree next to the pumpkin. So on the left side, it's basically the same colors as I have used for the scary house. So it's kind of like indigo blue, and then adding a little bit with the crimson red, so it makes a nice purple. And here there's some paints gray. A lot of paint, and it's also important that within the tree there are some freeze patches where you can add some branches, so the tree looks a little bit more alive. It's not just a blob of colors. And then having like a first layer, but basically adding more and more of a darker colors where it's actually still wet, and make it flow within the painting. So here's more of a paints gray than anything, and then I'm adding more of the purple, so it's really kind of like sticking out better, and it has more structure, especially as the tree hasn't got that many details. But yes, also on the side I add more and more of the dark, adding some nice branches to the pumpkin. Why the paper is still wet, while the paint is still wet, I kind of make it flow downwards. So I added to the mixture more water, so it gives lighter color, and adding also some more turquoise blue underneath, and it's spreading nicely downwards. Here and there I add a little bit more shadows. I actually have decided to make like a small puddle of pumpkin juice in the front, and adding some seeds, so I paint around the seeds, and adding here a little bit of orange and turquoise blue It's still orange, but it's a little bit mixed with the turquoise blue, so it's not that clean anymore. But it doesn't really matter because it's on the ground and it's like a nice puddle. Now continue with the pumpkin and adding more of the red orange around the eyes. I don't completely surround the eye with the deep color, but I make sure that it's just like certain bits, so it's kind of like really popping out and you don't have to cover it completely with the red paint. It already looks quite nice. And adding also on the left eye a little bit of the color, and it actually will dissolve more and more when there's gonna be added is it already third layer. Here I also emphasize more of the teeth of the pumpkin. Here and there a little bit of more color, and as well as at the top of more of the darker paint. Especially it's quite good to add some of it on the sides of the segments to make them all pop out. Around the nose should not be forgotten completely, and then at the top of the pumpkin. At this point I add already a little bit of the lighter layer of orange and make sure that it's kind of like round strokes, so like the shape of the pumpkin rather than just randomly adding some colors. Underneath pumpkin we have already like a little bit of a turquoise blue, and to make sure like a small shadow areas and some Prussian blue, and then spreading it towards downwards where the little puddle is. And yes, then I continue with the leaves. I haven't focused that much on them yet, and I won't add that many colors or that much paint on it. I just leave it light, but add some turquoise blue and spread it around, and then add a little bit of bits of orange here and there, so it's not completely boring. It doesn't really matter if they mixed up that much. I spread some water actually around the path, so it's not that sharp, especially at the back, and adding a little bit more paint towards the house and the grave area. Now I add some of this fake green, this viridian green on the grave stones itself, a little bit in the bushes there, and then as well on the leaf of the pumpkin. Where everything has dried, then I add probably the third or fourth layer of orange. So now focused mostly on the pumpkin itself. I believe the background is nearly done. So it's like real light layer and really like in the shape of the ball. Adding here and there a little bit of the darker colors, like a darker orange, so to around the segments as well as around the eyes and at the top where it's the darkest spots, where they are the darkest spots. And then emphasize the pumpkin seeds, so adding their orange underneath them as well as underneath the leaf itself. It's a little bit red. And some turquoise blue, while the paper is still a little bit wet. And then adding a little bit more of details to the graves stones especially at the front, not necessarily at the back. Emphasizing the paddle, so it's just like underneath one side. And then adding some grass, because I thought it looks a little bit empty in the corners. Because it's Halloween, I had some dead fly. I thought it's really nice addition, and a small spider. And then still emphasizing the underneath, the pumpkin, the lighter areas, and to make it really pop out. So it's basically like a darker blue mixed up. Not very clean, but it does its purpose. Adding here and there a little bit of colors, not just light layers, and then again around the pumpkin teeth some more blue and red. Also I added a light layer of turquoise blue on the left side of the pumpkin to kind of create a little bit of a balance. Then I let it dry, and I add the last layer in the shape of the pumpkin. In the background I add some bats to emphasize the Halloween atmosphere. One bigger one, one smaller one. And while the pumpkin has dried, I add a little bit more orange. So it gets a stronger color of orange and it really pops up from the background. As well as the mouth and the eyes are emphasized a little bit better. Well, I believe that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video, and don't forget to subscribe. Bye and happy Halloween!